up any questions, but we're live. So we're back after 3 months. Me and MariAnne had a chance to shoot our first podcast, but as usual, we had software issues, and the half of the first recording didn't get recorded.
Drama.
So we're back. What happened to my screen just now? But we're Groups. He's the CEO of the company, and run right through it. Who are you? What do you do? And why do you do it?
So I have had this company for 2 decades, and I built it originally because I actually used to own an agency in the 90s, in the early 90s, which I worked with a lot of insurance carriers and financial services. And I'm like, I really want to work with tech companies because I saw those budgets as way more consistent. So, in financial services, it's like everybody needed me, nobody needed me, so
Yeah.
it was definitely more volatile. With tech, it was very consistent. So, um, I had when my agency had cycled out, I actually had taken some executive roles in some tech companies. So then I became a consumer of outsourced services. And one of the things I saw was I couldn't find anybody that I felt good putting in front of our prospects. Um, they were pitching me, oh, I use this software, our agents can't get to this screen without answering these questions, and I'm like, okay, that's not the kind of experience that I want to provide to these customers.
Mm-hmm.
And what kind of outcomes can I expect? Nobody would put any kind of prediction or anything. It was all about dials and activity.
Yeah.
So after, and the funny thing was that the whole .com thing was going on and all that, and tech became very volatile. So, I went through 3 acquisitions, and I worked with one that was VC funded. And so I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go back and start an agency, but I'm going to build something that I would have hired. So I built this company, which is very different. So even though I market to as B2B telemarketing, it's actually not what we do. It's like that times 1,000.
Yeah.
And yeah, and we work with very large enterprise tech companies, and we find where there's active sales cycles for them. And then we track it. We provide deep dive documentation in a very narrative style. So when it goes to the team, they can really plan for it, and it accelerates their sales process substantially, and it works. So I had one client, they just did a report recently, and 85% of the leads, the ones that we categorized as leads, converted to opportunities. So that's huge.
That's
And these are
massive.
big deals. Those are like, low end $500,000 deals at.
Wow. So why though? Why sales?
Uh why did it, I mean, that's kind of where the money's at, right? So,
Yep.
you know, like, and it's a lot of fun. And the thing that I love about this is I work with so much variety of tech. So I'm never bored. I'm always right in front of emerging trends. Um, the conversations that we have are great conversations, and we're actually helping people to solve problems in their companies, both the companies that we're talking to for clients, and also for the clients, we're solving a big problem for them. So it's really rewarding too, just on that front. It's rewarding just to see the impact of it.
So how does in such a volatile world you went through obviously the massive crisis in '08, then COVID. How does one build a business that is able to sustain these volatile economic times? What is one key thing that you have to do to create a consistent business that can weather those storms?
You have to have output that matters. So, especially when you're going through a crisis, I find that our demand goes even up further. So, and because of the crunch that they're in, they're like, we got to close deals. We've got to build pipeline. And so they're facing a crisis. they're like, we got to find somebody to help us. So I have never had a downturn because of any kind of economic crisis. In fact, I've taken on new clients during that. So I know in the beginning of COVID, some people like totally freaked out, but in the end, it ended up being some of our best years during that, just because people needed us.
And was it because you had a strong inbound engine? Was it a great referral network? Like within the business, what allowed you to stay thriving through all of this?
A lot of it is referrals. So
Okay.
I often will work with a company. They had a great experience. Then they go to their new role. First thing they do, they bring us in. Um, Also, I've got a good inbound flow, but we're so careful of who we take on because I've got a pretty narrow
Yeah.
ICP. So a lot of the companies that call us, I just end up referring out. So it's got to be a fit for multiple, kind of metrics that I'm looking for. I'm looking at their volume, their sales, what the total cost of ownership is of their platform. Are they able to execute on our stuff? That's another thing. I really work with them to make sure that their team can handle what we do. Um, we could do a great job and, it just falls flat, on the front lines because the reps can't engage with it. So, and the reason they can't is because they don't really understand what we're delivering because it's so much depth. So they'll just get something and say, oh, I'll just call them. And they didn't really read and plan. And at one point, I actually worked with an organizational psychologist because that was kind of this ongoing problem is they weren't reading it. And it's not like we're sending them a ton, but some of these reports have like 600-word narrative, or more. And and in that case, it's generally an opportunity. So they've
Mm,
got to be able to take that baton and go talk to that prospect and don't cover the stuff. You don't need to recover all that ground. You need to take it from there and construct your engagement from that.
yeah.
So one of the problems I had seen over time was a lot of reps just don't like to read and plan to
Yep.
that degree. So I worked with an organizational psychologist, and so we constructed a profile format that kind of addresses the people that don't want to read so much, and then the people that plan like crazy and do a great job with it. So that way, regardless of who gets it, they know what to do, what not to do. Don't do this, and make sure you do that. And that really helped tighten it up a lot.
Yeah, because I saw that as the major biting point for me when I was running my agency was our first major client that we had. We took them to um they were our first client, longest client, and like the separation of the client was the worst too because we got we well they spent over £200,000 with us. In the first 7 months, they generated €100,000,
Hmm.
but even through the whole process, the sticking point was always the handover.
Yeah, and that's always.
And you want to get to a point where like you think like when you first build an agency and you're new to it and maybe you might even not have run a bigger organization, you expect the handover to go smoothly. This is the name, the title of the person, make an introduction, and that usually would do it. But then we inherited the phone, and then we started to use phone conversations and extracting the transcript and everything that was gone through the 3 4 conversations before it became an opportunity. And then we went a step beyond, and above contact details, then we'd go into just baseline details of the description of the company, what Google news they had, who do they kind of report to
Yeah,
and speak to in their network, and then maybe some insightful things that they're looking at tactically and strategically within the company. And these morons would go into these meetings and bant them.
yeah,
And we would, and some of my reps, it was so funny because I had some of them were like from a part of London where the accent is like, let's just say they sound like they're from the streets. And they're calling me back up and he's like, Shane, my man Aaron is fucking up my lead. He's fucking talking to him like an idiot, bro. He's talking to him like an idiot. What should I do? And this would happen every time. And we couldn't get to the point where we'd give feedback to the marketing director
Mhm.
To then speak to her account executive, who was typically a grown man. Now, the marketing director was a younger woman who reported to
Right.
a CEO woman too. So that feed, like that loop, was like extremely
Yeah,
volatile, very up and
yeah.
down. And that was the one company that taught us how to create a better handover. So for you, what was it that may helped you besides organizational psychology? What other things helped you, for those agency owners that are listening, create a good handover from you creating a good qualified lead and then passing that over to be used and taken forward without basically fucking it up?
Yeah, so I'll tell you, the thing you just described, that happens with internal teams. So it's not just working with an agency that
Yep.
creates that problem. They could have an outbound BDR team that's doing the exact same thing, and then it goes over to the frontline AEs, and the thing falls apart.
Yep.
And it's the exact same things that cause that. And what it is a lack of understanding of what was the origin of this thing. So what were they talking about? What was the effort put into it? How hard is this prospect to reach? What are they expecting as a next step? What are they not expecting? And don't do this. So it's a matter of
Mhm.
documenting it and having a workflow. So I actually wrote an ebook that it's on our website and you can download it, but it talks about how to outsource successfully. So there's a bunch of things that happens. First off, a lot of companies outsource to an agency that's a terrible match. So
Yep.
they're just like grossly mismatched. Everybody's got different expectations. The workflows are all messed up, so that happens all the time. The other thing is, a lot of, and this is just, it's not something that's going to go away just because of what it is. But when people think B2B telemarketing, they're imagining being at home and getting calls about their credit cards or their home insurance, or you know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
so they think
It's not what
telemarketing
we do.
think. So they don't put a lot of value on it. And so they think, well, we want to do telemarketing, but we don't want to spend a bunch of money on it. So then what they do is they get, you know, it- I wrote an article about this, that there's ads out there like telemarketers, B2B telemarketers for $7 an hour. It's like, I who are you going to hire for $7 an hour that can talk about $1 million solution? It's like you're just not going to find them. But companies think cheap, then they engage these companies, they deliver this like disaster of a program, and then they say telemarketing doesn't work. Okay, you know. So that's the problem, is people's understanding of what's going on, how the things are getting handed off, what the reps are seeing. And just like you were saying, that goes to some AE. The guy's probably totally uncoachable. he's not
Yeah.
gonna he's not gonna take advice from a telemarketer who he views as beneath him in skill.
Mhm. Yep.
So they're like, don't tell me what to do, I've been doing this for 2 decades and I'm not gonna take advice
Yep.
from you. So the thing is set up to fail right out of the gate. um, and, I'll give you an example of something like that. We talked to one, and we were calling huge, like Fortune 500 companies. And
Yeah.
we talked to a VP of HR. They were very interested. They gave us so much information. So you should have seen the content on this. It goes to the rep, and they basically got hung up on. And I'm like, what did they say to him? What would have happened that was the outcome? I thought that can't be what happened. So we called a person back, have another great conversation. I said, I guarantee that conversation didn't even register with them as being part of that initial conversation.
Mhm.
And it was very hard to synchronize sales and marketing. Marketing was kind of behind this wall. They weren't going to tell the reps what to do. They weren't really delivering the things in a way that a rep would spend any time on. They're basically like, hey, here's a lead at such and such, call them up. And then the person would call and say, well, I'm calling with so and so, and I know you spoke with somebody and that you're interested in this thing. And they're like, I'm not interested in that thing, because that wasn't what was discussed. It was
Mhm.
a whole, point solution to a problem they were having that you would have had to actually do some selling
Of
and
course.
introduce it, bring it in, so that stuff happens all the time. Um, so the way that you fix it is by making sure you've got a workflow and
Hmm.
making sure that it's getting executed on the other side. Like one of the things that I mentioned in the ebook is a lot of times when companies first start working with you, their senior executives are all excited about it. And they're like, yeah, this is great. Over time, maybe they kind of assign the management of the program to someone that's, maybe an admin or a lower level manager. And it's somebody that doesn't have the teeth to affect any change. So you
Yeah,
might be making recommendations and they're like, yeah, yeah, okay, that's great. That's great. They're not doing it. And then the visibility isn't happening at the more senior levels. And then they're
yeah,
looking at this thing and they're like, what's going on here? And you can't have that. It's like everybody's got to be involved. And you have to know what's going on. I can always tell a company that is going to do well with our program because I can ask about a certain account, like, hey, what's going on with this? And they're like, oh, we did this, right? So I'll know that
big.
this
That's a big
program
one.
is rocking because everybody's all over it. And another company, if I ask about that, they're like, oh gosh, I don't know. I'm looking here in Salesforce. It doesn't really see anything. I'm not sure what's good. I'm like, okay, so I know that is going to be a problem. So I'll try to escalate it and course correct it. But you can't always do that because sometimes they're they're the ones that are uncoachable too.
So, what do you see as some of the biggest challenges an agency owner faces that maybe you've experienced one or two of them that you can highlight right now and shine a light on how you were able to get through it, kind of weather the storm again in that situation, and then come out on the other side where like it helped redefine or further define who you were as a person?
Yeah. Well, all of it's about differentiating what you do. So, are you able to provide consistent long-term production for them? A lot of people, anybody that knows me knows that I hate the selling appointments thing because
Mm-hmm.
that whole thing just devalues all the work that goes into it. I pay tens of thousands of dollars for data sources and software and AI and I mean all the stuff that I pay for and I'm not going to get paid unless I can set a meeting. And that's ridiculous. This is a whole business. This is an operation just like if you did it internally you would have an operation. And one of the things that happens is that kind of stuff falls apart. So if you're setting yourself up for failure by pricing incorrectly, then when the time comes, they're going to say, "Oh, all these things fell apart." It's like, yeah, well, you've had territory changes 3 times. The rep stood up a meeting.
Mm-hmm.
That rep doesn't even work there anymore. Nobody's touched. I mean, there's all kinds of things that can
Yeah.
happen. So don't set yourself up for failure like that. Another thing is you have to be able to demonstrate the value, and I'll tell you something about that. When I first started this company, it's a lot of work to set up a client. So there's you've got a knowledge transfer, you've got your system customization, you've got a lot of list building, all this stuff, and I looked at it like I'm putting skin in the game with you. So
Yeah.
this is how I partner with you is I'm doing all this and then we're going to hit the ground running. Um, because I did that, they put no value on it. And so I remember one time specifically, I was having a conversation with a client and they were talking about how, well, you've got room to discount because I know you're making money on the back end. I'm like, I'm not making money. Where am I making money on the back end? Right. It's like we're all working on this thing and there's a lot of expense that goes into it. So,
Massive expense.
yeah, so documenting what you're actually doing to put value on it is very important. So there's a lot of things that they don't necessarily understand if you don't tell them because outsourcing is sometimes this black box, right? Like, oh, they have lists and they do all this stuff and they email. I'm not sure what they're doing. And then they've got a
Yeah.
team, I guess they're calling and stuff. So I don't know. We just get the output. It's great. So, you've got to say, this is what happens. Like, I
Yeah.
subscribe to like $60,000 a year worth of crap. And all of that is to build your pipeline. Plus, I have all these data analysts and I've got all these other people and we manually verify everything. And so
Hmm.
then they can envision what would that take like what would that take to bring this in house? I mean, it would be impossible because the only reason we're able to do it at scale is because we have multiple clients.
Hmm.
So for them to bring an operation like this in house would just be, cost prohibitive. But
Yeah.
you to explain all the things that happen. So it's not like, we've got these millions of names that we just happen to have, or, all of that stuff takes a ton of work and a
It
ton of
does.
expense. And you've got to have the right people. You've got to have people that understand it. Another thing, I don't hire sales reps to do this kind of work. So I know we've talked about that before.
Hmm.
My profile, it's funny. I went to it was a big company. And they're like, "Well, we want people that have experience in our technology in sales." And I'm like, "Okay, that is not the skill you're buying. So
Hmm.
the skill you're buying is somebody that can call a prospect, a senior level prospect in an organization, and
Hmm.
get them to stop what they're doing and talk with you for 15 minutes and extract all this information about their initiatives and then set up a next step. That's
Yeah.
not a sales rep. So, and that skill set is not technology specific either.
Of course.
I hire people that came out of, like military intelligence
Hmm.
or requirements gathering, project managers, journalists, people that know how to have a conversation. And
Yeah.
that's a completely different profile. Um, I find sales reps are often just trying to get a meeting. It's like you got them on the phone. You're in a meeting, right? It's like have the conversation now while you're actually having
Hmm.
this meeting instead of calling them just to ask them to get on the phone again at another time.
Very
So
true.
you need to have the conversation while you're having them, and that is not always easy to do for reps. So that's why I don't hire sales reps. I just find that other profiles work a lot better because it is very much intelligence gathering.
Absolutely. So challenges faced are client not having enough transparency and defining what kind of operation is happening or taking place, step by step kind of thing. And then as you wrap that last part up, don't hire salespeople to do really, and I find this hard to, well, I do a very hard job, which is asking it, like I never understood it, and that's why I had a big problem with it. Was how on earth, and it wasn't until I ran a business that I'm able to say this, but how on earth can you hire somebody out of college or even out of high school and say, this is a canon, this person's going to do it, like they're going to be great? Fair enough. Unless they've run and operated a massive, not even a massive, just a business with 3 to 4 different functions within that business, and they understand how money works and operations and expenses and profits and everything, how everything moves. There's no way you can call the CEO of a Fortune
Right.
500 company and say, hey, I understand your business, and I'd like to have, not only I'd like to have a conversation with you in the middle of your day, but then I'd also like to have another 15 minutes where I know that you know that if I set up this meeting with this person, they're going to try to sell you something.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they
It's
all know it. They all know it.
Yeah,
Nobody's
you're not calling
oblivious
them
to it.
to make friends, right?
Of
It's like
course.
you're calling them because it's a business opportunity. And if you take that sales call and make it a business call mentality, that also is a very different outcome because
Hmm.
all of us get calls from sales reps and it just kind of feels icky.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I just posted on LinkedIn yesterday because someone sent me a connection request. I looked at them. We knew a bunch of the same people. I'm like, yeah, cool. So I accept. Then they sent me a note that was like not a sales pitch. I'm like, oh, that was awesome. Look forward to knowing them. I checked out what they did a little bit. Within an hour, they send me the sales pitch. And then it's like, and it was actually kind of pushy. It's like, so what date works for you? I have this time and that time. And I'm like, okay, first off, I'm not going to show you my financials. I don't even know you. Right. And so
Right.
why would I do that? And then it's like, why would I engage with you. I've got advisors I've had for years. I've got a CPA that's amazing. It's like, why would I why would I go to you, you know? And so, I look at LinkedIn as a great place to nurture relationships. You can start relationships on LinkedIn definitely, but
Hmm.
to start with a pitch, that's pretty lousy. So you need somebody that can navigate business dynamics. They've got to
Hmm.
be have a certain level of maturity that they just understand how conversations work.
Yep.
Uh, and also they've got to have some technical fluency. They've got to understand, enterprise tech, how it works, how companies buy tech. They need to be able to educate themselves on an industry, what's going on in that industry, what kind of stuff are they buying, what kind of challenges do they have. So there's a lot involved in that. Um, so that's another thing. So a lot of it just comes down to making sure it's a good match. Like, don't sign a deal just because you
Mhm.
sign
Yeah.
a deal. Yeah, sign a deal that's a good match because you'll have that client for years. I've had clients for 11, 12 years, and that's because it's a really good match.
Of
Um,
course.
and I could sign all these little ones that call me, or all these ones that are kind of not exactly what we do, and
Mhm.
those ones are kind of destined to fail. So just be careful what you sign.
Absolutely. I've signed again in desperation, and even in the beginning, I've learned very, very quickly and far too quickly that that was one of the biggest mistakes, because not only does a bad deal end up creating a lot of friction within your company, it can also create different types of dynamics in terms of trust with you and with you and your team. It can change up any type of conversation. It really ends up being bad. It could screw you up financially. They could, one of the worst experiences, yeah, they had money, but then they executed a campaign. I think it was a couple of months into us hiring people for that campaign, then they said we're not paying.
Yeah, see that, and then it becomes a collection issue, and then it's
Exactly. And then you have to figure out, how do you pay for those people from other campaigns or other money? And then, like, it's, oh my God, what an absolute headache. So, where or at what point did you discover the spark for being a business owner, being an entrepreneur? Was it prior to the agency? Was it in high school? Was it in college? Was it beyond the agency? Is there a specific time where you could just find out or really identify that was the moment I knew I had a spark, or I knew I had something different about this world?
that's a great question. I Owning a business always seemed normal to me because my mom owned a business.
Hmm.
And, we talked about that. My
Hmm.
mom was like this total rock star. So she was an insurance broker, and she did that at a time like in the 60s. So women were not insurance brokers in the
Hmm.
60s. My dad said that they'd be at like events for the carriers. And I think I think State Farm was the big carrier that she worked with. And they would call out last names to come up and get awards, and everybody would look at my dad and he goes, "That's her." My dad worked at NASA. He was like messing around with like space
Yeah.
stuff. It's like my mom was a broker. She did very well. Um, and she had a real estate license, and she also started a flag company, and she would sell flags to the schools, to the car dealerships, custom flags for clubs and associations, and banners and football stuff and sports stuff. And so she just did it. So to me, it always seemed really normal to do that. And
Hmm.
so two things: really normal to start a business, and really normal for a woman to start a business. I mean, it didn't even occur to me that it would be hard. And so it wasn't.
Hmm.
When I remember I was interviewing for a job. I don't even remember when it was. It was before I started my first agency. And I thought, I don't really like this company, but I could really help them. And so I actually did some projects for them. I thought, I don't want to work here full time, but I talked to them about it, and I did some projects for them for quite a while. And then I expanded into a bigger agency. But then, like I said, it was just too volatile of a space being in at the time. But I mean, I did it for years. So
Hmm.
it supported me. It did great. But that to me, it was always very normal. And I look back on jobs, um, pre first agency. Then when I started working in tech, I look at that and it was really volatile. I mean, we're going through acquisitions and we're going through, um, just it was not stable. And I thought, this is worse than owning a business at this time. It's not like when my parents grew up where you work at a company forever and you retire.
Yeah.
It's especially when you're in tech because there's always changes. So,
Hmm.
my reference point was, okay, so I've been through acquisitions. I had a VC funded company that flopped. All these different things. I thought, I'm gonna go create this thing that is amazing. That's exactly what I would have wanted to work with. So that's what I did. And I find this to be more consistent and more long-term, viable situation than ever working at a company. I don't know anybody that's worked at a company. Well, I take that back. I know a few people, but I mean, working at the same company for 20 years is pretty rare, especially in tech. But I've been doing this and it's stable, and we just keep enhancing what we're doing to stay in front of trends and deliver what companies are looking for. And it's a lot of fun. So I think for me, it just seemed normal.
Yeah.
It wasn't, I see a lot of people are like, should I start a business? And they're all afraid. And a lot of the problem is people want to start a business, but they want to act like an employee. So
Yeah.
if you got to own it. So if you are, what should you do with your tech stack? Like, I'm always evaluating our tech stack. I make sure that I've got a ton of value that I bring to my clients that is saving them a lot. So they don't have to buy the tools that I'm bringing because we use them in a way that they would use them internally. So that's that's what you have to do to give yourself the longevity. So you can't just say, "Oh, I'm going to do this thing. Like, I'm just going to do email marketing and I've been using the same platform for a decade." It's like, yeah, okay. There's a lot of way cooler stuff that you could be doing now. So I think it's just really aligning. And I do a ton of thought leadership stuff in this space too. And what can we do? What can we use? Where's AI coming into it? Like, what's a good use for AI? What's a bad use for AI? There's a lot of really slick use cases that we picked up on and applied to programs. And that's the stuff that adds value, because a lot of times within a company, it's very hard to implement a change, but we can implement a change much faster. I mean, we've got
Of
that
course.
agility to be able to do that where they don't. So that's what I always look at is, am I continuing to evolve so that I'm always providing the very best value.
I think that's one of the reasons I started my agency too. It was one of the first things was we were in a we were owned by the sixth richest man in the UK.
Hmm.
The sixth richest man in the UK. His name is Mike Dalio, I think it is. Um, owns a company called Global Data. They're very similar to Gartner, and they own a number of different publishing agencies. And we had a PC with internet connection, LinkedIn standard. They would not pay for premium. They would not pay for Sales Navigator. No type of intelligence in terms of finding contact data. Everything was switchboard. Like, the way I learned how to source leads was I was selling demand generation webinars for oil and gas service companies. So let's say predictive maintenance solutions.
Right.
Aviva was a company that we worked with, and there was no other way to find out competitors other than to search predictive maintenance, predictive analytics, or predictive maintenance in oil and gas solutions. And then
Right.
Google would have to provide the results. And then I'd have to go to the company page, contact us, go through Switchbird. And it was such a nightmare. And then I found Cognism, which I thought was very cool, from a guy called Daniel Disney, who I followed on LinkedIn. And then that opened up Pandora's box into, all right, well, now you've got Cognism. Now you've got so much data. You've got the ability to call it quickly. You need to be able to call it quicker, because, yes, you can do this for one client, but how are you going to do it for six? So you need
Yep.
to be able to do that 8 hour day in 1 hour, in 1 hour, right? And then you got into, oh my god, intent data and how to use AI in calls. So that brings us on to the next point of like, where do you see our industry going? And then we will obviously touch upon AI. But in your mind right now, where do you see the outbound telesales, telemarketing industry going in the next 12 to 24 months?
Yeah, so I know you've heard me say this. It's not that people don't take calls, they don't take bad calls. So
Yeah.
I think the bad call stuff is going to continue to diminish. It has been for a long time. And I'm all about not putting your worst people on the front lines. So that's even internally. Like companies have this weird model of, they think, okay, this is entry level. Let's get some entry level people and make them SDRs, and then they can work their way up and be a sales rep someday. And it's like, okay, so you're going to take your least experienced person that has the least amount of executive business technology fluency and put them on the front line to call the biggest stakeholders in the company. Like, why would you do that? They do it all the time. And I know a lot of people still, they're still going to do that. They don't agree with me. But I look
Mhm.
at it like that skill set that you've got to have to be able to call somebody and get them to stop what they're doing and talk to you and have any kind of meaningful exchange. That's a pretty sophisticated skill set. So
Very.
that takes a lot. So I do think that will always work. I don't think that's going to go away, because the other thing, a lot of the people that we're talking to are not in tech. They're not in this kind of, little micro kind of group of people that are really edgy and out there in front. And, they are buying all the tech stuff and all the AI stuff, and they know all the lingo and all that stuff. It's like there's a lot of businesses that we're selling to that are pretty old school. They're late adopters. They've still got old tech. They've still got old management practices. And so those people are, yeah, they're going to be accessible and have a conversation with them. It's just a small pool of companies that are, really innovative. So that group is much smaller than the bigger group that you're selling to. So I don't think that will change. I do think agencies have to step up, because I do notice a lot of agencies popping up, and a
So
lot of those
many.
a lot of those people that lost their job. So I'm like, it's like job fair of agencies, right?
Yep.
So they're not really an agency. They're somebody that lost their job, and
Yeah.
they're like, I'm just going to go start a company doing this. And then they're out there marketing. Maybe they've got an ability to build a website. And there's a ton of respected agencies out there. So don't get me wrong. There's some really good ones, but there's also all these little ones that are not, they're not really an agency in the true sense. They're
No.
people
Oh
that
my
are doing this thing and they're selling their skills to do whatever. So that's like sometimes you go to these networking events of agencies, and I'm like, it's like a big job fair, right? And everybody's just, they're looking for clients and they want your clients, and
yeah.
it's
Mhm.
like, okay, that's not something I want to participate in. That's I do think the good agencies will continue to establish their presence. I think a lot of these agencies that aren't great, if they're good enough to get acquired, they will. If they're not, they'll just kind of fizz out and do whatever. But I always see a good place for agencies. The other thing is, I do see the demand for them going up, because for a company, the risk to hire somebody is at an all-time high. So you make a bad hire, that could cost you, hundreds of thousands of dollars, because, they're perceiving you're doing something, or, I mean,
Mhm.
we're in a very litigation minded society now. And so there's a lot of risk to hiring somebody. You've got to go through all this onboarding, and I see on a X or Twitter or whatever, so many people are talking about these interview cycles are going through, where they've got to interview with like 10 people, they've got to do like a sample project, they've got to do this. I mean, they're really trying to vet who they bring on
Of
and reduce their
course.
risk. And not just the risk of getting sued for something, but just the risk of all the time to hire somebody and onboard them. And, they take 6 months to get up to speed. And then 6 months later, they get a better job and they're out of there. And
Yeah.
it's like that whole thing, you paid a recruiter, you paid for this, you stopped looking, you let your other candidates that were good, you dropped off from them. They went and found other jobs. I mean, there's just so much that is potentially very expensive, a lot more than hiring an FTE. So I do think the demand for good agencies is going to step up. But the thing that you've got to do is you've got to have the workflow so that, because the way I look at us is we're a department for them. We're not
Hmm.
just this agency out in a black hole that they talk
Yeah.
to. Like we're
Yeah.
actively engaged with them and we are a department for them. And that's really the way to look at it, because that's what justifies the expense.
I think it's very just as you pointed that out. It's the exact reason it justifies the expense because you can easily go and again, one of the things I did was when I first started, I knew my capabilities, but reading and watching a bunch of video tutorials on Udemy, they said go hire somebody from the Philippines and see how that goes. And that did
Right.
happen. And I hired a wonderful lady called Beverly who had a family and she also experienced torrential rainstorms every other day or tsunamis or power outages.
Yeah.
And it came to one point of she booked like I knew my scripts were good, so she booked a couple of meetings that I was quite impressed with. And then she took one into a meeting where he was about to pay for, I think, a couple of months' service, $10,000. And
Mhm.
I said, "Who is this guy? Like, who is this guy that is apparently just going to pay for this service?" And she goes, "I scammed him, okay? I scammed him before." And I was like, "Oh my
Oh,
God. And you was going to sell him my service?" And again, I had to cut ties with that woman from
yeah.
then. But then that's where people get into the thing of yes, that was $10 an hour, but she had no systems, no operations, no experience. It was just again the only thing she had experience and nothing bad against her, but that's all she knew was maybe taking a PayPal call,
Yeah.
right?
It's funny. Yeah,
It's
I
not an
hired.
agency.
Yeah. No.
It's not an agency where you have our price of our service at one point was £8,666 per month, three agents, and that was around 20 something thousand. And that's not a Filipino or somebody from Bangladesh that's going to make calls from you. You had a fully fledged operation with
Right.
data, validation, everything that went with it. So the price thing is a very, very big point. And one thing that really caught my attention that you said is we've had tons of interviews with predominantly the majority of them are agency owners.
Mhm.
And a lot of the conversations are about realizing when you build an agency and you get to a certain point that you become curious about being acquired. And
Right.
then you may entertain a few conversations with investors, and then investors historically have given. Maybe I've even had those conversations where they said your business is not really investable
Right.
because there's not enough profit or there's not enough recurring revenue. It's too volatile. So the point you made, I think, is very interesting because I'm hearing it with creators. So a lot of businesses, instead of going to hire a creator and build it internally, are just going to hire Jake Paul or Logan Paul or KSI or something like that.
Right.
And that now sounds quite familiar with what you're saying with the agencies. So, what do you say to those that have been through investor conversations and historically have seen that agencies or service based businesses are difficult to invest in because of how volatile they're in versus what we could be seeing then in the next 12 to 24 months? And
Yeah.
if that agency is viable to be acquired, what does the kind of avatar of that agency look like?
So really what you're selling is your brand, and your process. And I think one of the biggest problems that agencies have is they don't have documentation about their process. So what are they buying? Can they replicate it, or is the process all you? Right. So sometimes, an agency owner has this really great methodology that they're executing on. So can somebody replicate that? That's what an investor is going to look at, or a buyer is going to look at, is how do I replicate this? So, or am I just buying a website and some inbound
Hmm.
traffic? So I think if somebody wants to get acquired, they should start documenting everything. Like I own the Telesales 2.0 trademark, and we have, and I'm not shopping to be acquired or anything, but I mean, I built documentation around it because I'll implement that at clients. And so it's a actual process, and a predictable process that someone else can execute, because even if you sell your agency, you've got to stay there for a while and stabilize it and integrate
Hmm.
it and all that. um, if you're just selling a web page and your current client base, and your internet inbound traffic, it's like, what's that worth?
So, how do you see AI being used in the best of ways over the next 5 years?
I think it will be best used to keep, well, there's so many ways. I mean, you can't even.
5 years is a long time in terms of progression. With like we've seen what 18 months of progression in like public view.
Mhm.
So 5 years, possibilities are endless. If
Yeah,
you were
I
to put
think,
your imagination, what do you see?
I think one of the biggest ways, and we talked about this on the roundtables that we were doing, that you let me be part of. The I think a big deal is by having it on the front lines, because that's where there's the biggest breakdown. Like, marketing departments do this fabulous job of, taking prospects through this digital journey, and
Mm,
they're downloading the right thing, and they're going over here, and they're demonstrating interest there, and they're on webinars, and they're doing all this stuff, and then it goes to the front lines and it just completely falls apart. And then they go and
yeah,
shoot the program. They're like, oh, that didn't work, that webinar series didn't work. And it's like, did it not work? Or was it that something happened on the front
poorly
line that
executed.
you just are totally blind to? So
Hmm.
I think where we see a big impact is, tools like Gong, or, being able to integrate it between your sales and marketing systems. There's a big problem of harmonizing what happens with sales and marketing. Um, and there's always kind of been this weird battle with sales and marketing, which is totally unnecessary. It's really the lack of communication that's the problem.
I think
And
it's also just to jump in on that. I think it's a lack of understanding of what sales actually means today, because you have the movies that
yeah,
show one specific industry, and then you break that industry down and you have one specific type of business that just so happens to be capital markets or stock investing, right? And those are the really the movies that show you what selling is about. And then people go into door-to-door sales, window sales, roofing sales, plumbing sales, but then you have our world, which is technology sales.
right.
And we're in an environment where people know everything. They see everything they need on TikTok or social media or on LinkedIn. So when you come into the room and start selling to them from your spin selling method that was what 20 years ago, or any type of new books that you come, like, people read through it and they've read it too because they pass it on to their team.
Yeah, yeah.
And like, you've just got to realize, like, where I'm getting to, and John Barrows had a post about it today, and
Mm,
he a prospect chose him because everybody else went through what they do and how they do this, and then John mentioned how he was able to educate them on what's happening, where the industry's going, what kind of different things they'll see. And that's what, like, for me as a business owner now, if I have to figure out something with LinkedIn myself too, because all I get is the same kind of thing. You see two,
yeah.
three connections, or some days you'll have 15, and it's a freaking software developer saying, do you need software development? Or, hey, I'd like to meet with you. And then it ends up being a nutritional coach that wants to work with
Right.
CEOs.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, when am I going to catch a break? So
Yeah.
I think, like, for me, I think it's access to the right sales knowledge, being able to implement the right sales knowledge, having a step by step process of how to implement that, and then helping people have a natural conversation with somebody and speak to them, knowing like what the steps are kind of in your head of finding the
Mhm.
problem and then seeing if you can resonate and all that stuff. But like having that in a conversational manner instead of like a checklist that they. So, what kind of money do you guys usually spend on this? Okay.
Yeah.
So who
Well,
usually makes these decisions? And like they know that what you're doing, right?
yeah, it's just so cheesy. But so I think that, yeah, and the role of sales has totally changed. So like when I started in tech, the sales reps were the keeper of the information. So if you had a big digital initiative, you want to swap out your data center, you want to upgrade your servers, you want to implement an ERP, you had to work with the rep. Um,
Mhm,
and you had to work with them early so that you could know what was going on and kind of get a vision of what you think you might want to use. And but that has completely changed. So now all that information is online. So
mhm,
you can not only find everything you need to do your kind of early blueprint stages of planning, but you can also find who's using it. You can find other clients. You can just reach out to them directly. You don't have to ask for references. You could
mhm,
just look on LinkedIn and who's managing this, XYZ implementation, and just call them up and say, "Hey, I was thinking of using these guys. What's been your experience?" And the rep has become completely different in where they contribute to it. So a lot of what the sales rep needs to do now is help the prospects to visualize how
ah,
you're the fit, and help them, because that's the other thing that happens is your reps or your prospects are consuming information and you're not there.
we were going through like
Sales.
yeah, exactly. And sorry, so finish on that one, and then I want to
No,
ask you
that's right.
something.
Because, yeah, sales reps have a different role now in that
Yeah.
their role is more to surface wrong thinking that your prospects might have developed from looking up stuff on their own. Right.
Hmm.
So that's another thing because now, and like I mentioned before, do you want me to start over and talk about that part?
No, no, no. You can just come on from this.
Okay. So yeah, the role now of sales reps is to help undo wrong thinking that your prospect has developed from looking at stuff and thinking, oh, it's this. And it's like, no, it's
Hmm.
not, and
Yep.
also helping them to visualize how you can help them and finding out like what are their obstacles, like what, so it's a much more intelligent role that sales reps have now. So now it's not, pitching, selling, providing
Yep.
information, can't being pushy, and it's completely different now where you need to partner. You got to help them visualize. You got to help them see that your operational efficiencies are superior, and this is why. And here are some long-term clients. This is what they've experienced. So there's a much different role now that is more consultative. It's more partnering with them. It's helping them to visualize and also digging in and saying, have you looked at what kind of stuff have you looked at online? And then they'll tell you because a lot of stuff just doesn't get talked about. So,
Hmm.
you got to ask, like, have you been doing some research and stuff? What kind of things are you seeing? And find out what they're seeing, find out what they're thinking. There could be other people involved in the process and they're looking at stuff and they're thinking the wrong things. And, like we had one client, they were selling this network infrastructure. And so they had this one account they wanted to get into. And there was this one guy that was so negative, and he was always the obstacle. So he was always the person they couldn't get past. And so we called that guy, had a big old conversation with him about what he really thinks about it. And we found out that his ideas of what this technology was like 5 years old. And that's like not even a thing anymore. So for him to we had to just educate the guy because he really just was thinking the wrong thing.
Yep.
And the rep wasn't finding out. The rep is just like, this guy's not letting this happen. And he's always the problem in the meeting. And but actually talking to him and finding out that he's got very dated knowledge about the technology, able to fix that, they closed a $4 million deal. And they were the better provider. It was somebody with wrong information. And that happens all the time. So that's the role of the sales reps now. And The other thing that you mentioned about how agencies stay relevant, it's like if you see your clients not doing something, you need to do it for them. Because if there's some key part of your program that needs to happen, if you're just waiting around for them to do it, it's like it's not going to happen because they're
Never.
also very busy. They've got all kinds of deadlines and stuff. And it takes a lot of time to build that relationship with them so that they trust you and they'll make internal changes. So if there's something that needs to happen, you need to do it. Um,
And people forget that, like, within these businesses, people are having the teams that you're probably speaking to, the individuals you're speaking to, and the other stakeholders that
Mhm.
we tell you to go and speak to them for a reason, because they are all sitting on the Friday meeting discussing strategy, and they're asking,
Right.
did you have a conversation with that guy? Yeah, what did he say? How do you think? Okay, when are we going to move forward? We got to do this, and then we'll do this. People don't think about, like, there's so much again that I see where, again, you've got a young, like, they may be very well educated, but again, your
It's experience.
education
Yeah.
does not match the experience. So, as we wrap up and come to the top of the hour, number one thing that I focus on, it's how I've got through every single hiccup, obstacle, roadblock in my life, is the ability to remain resilient.
Yeah.
And my mechanism, it may not be the best, is I've had a lot of people doubt me, say horrible things about me, prey on my failure, and the motivation I get to prove them wrong, as well as proving it to me that I now have the stature and the authority to say, yeah, look, I've gone through it and I'm out on the
Yeah.
other side and 10 times better and so much further ahead.
Yeah.
That is my fuel to my fire. For you, and people who are listening to you, maybe younger females out there, women entrepreneurs, ambitious women, what kind of consistent habit have you inherited in your life or action that has really helped you remain resilient for however long it's been, from your first challenge that you almost broke to being able to sustain that kind of pain and get through it over and over and over again with X, and you defining X as?
Yeah. Um, hold on.
Yeah, get a drink for that one.
um, for one, I'm very independent. So I have always, and I think because I'm an only child, it's like
Mhm.
I always just did my own stuff, right? And
Yeah.
um, so I have this sense of independence. And also, like, don't get wrapped up in all the noise of, because there's so much conflict. It's like women in business and men in business and that and this and that. It's like just do your jobs,
Be a
right?
millionaire if you follow this course. Download my course and be a millionaire.
Yeah, it's like I the thing that always keeps me going, and one of the things I love what I do. It is so fun. I
Yeah.
love learning about all these different technologies and really digging in because to me it's so interesting. Um, I love the technology piece of it and how it's solving things and understanding real complex things. So that keeps me going a lot because I
Mhm.
really enjoy that. I also enjoy talking to companies and explaining to them what we do and learning about them and having them just blown away that we get it. And I love that too. I think the advice is um, understand what you want to do. I think a lot of people start businesses and they think like I'm just going to start a business and it's all going to magically happen. And it's like no, what I did, I had worked. I was a VP of marketing for what my last gig was a VP of marketing, and I was going to tons of trade shows. I knew a ton of people. I had a ton of business cards, contacts I'd had for years, and I called them up. I'm like, hey, I'm doing this thing, and they're like, we need this thing. And one of those companies I worked with for a decade, so it's like you got to have a plan and you've got to take advice from people and look at who you're taking advice from. Like I had one person that was always like ripping up my website, and I'm like, okay, you have no job. And and this was a person in tech, right? And
Mm,
they were always all doom, like, "Oh, people aren't buying that anymore." And I'm like, okay, when you make the money off of a website that I make off mine, then you've got some credibility to criticize it. So you need to know who to listen to and where you go for advice, because there are tons of people that will tell you something's not working and don't do that and do this. And there's all kinds of things that could destabilize you, but you need to just see it and make it work and don't over plan. Like some
mm.
people are so afraid to pull the trigger on something.
Oh,
I had one person, I'm always, and I think that's another thing is I always take opportunities to, talk to others, to teach others, to get in front of people, to get in front of an audience. And, a lot of people feel like they've got to have everything perfect. And come on, how many times have we been on webinars and there's like typos and slides and stuff like that? I
mm.
mean, it just happens. And not that I'm saying that you go out there with crap, but it's like, you don't have to be so uptight about everything being perfect before you start.
I
And
love.
nobody is going to sit around and say, I'm not going to buy that because he had bad punctuation in that. It's like nobody cares about that stuff, right? And if anything, it just makes you realize that everybody's just people and we're all trying to get our stuff out there and talk to people. And so don't get paralyzed by fear of not being perfect. Um, that's a huge thing.
I couldn't agree more. It's one of the many, many reasons I fell out with my old business partner. And it was mainly because there would be ideas. Not every idea gets to the table, but the ability to share ideas with a person who you think is at equal stature to you and have them kind of share their opinion and iterate the idea, that is the fun behind, in a lot of fun in running a business. And
Yeah.
I would get to those conversations and imagine sitting in front of your business partner and you're sharing with enthusiasm, and the person's just like,
Yeah. Like just shooting down everything. Yeah.
yeah. And I was like, oh my God. Like eventually it got to just, again,
Yeah.
and that's another learning lesson. Know when to, I think one of the major things of it that's helped me, or is helping me beyond some of the other things that has helped me be resilient, is knowing when to pull the plug on something and
Yeah.
not letting your emotions get in the way.
Yeah. Totally.
Because a big investor told me this a
Yeah.
while ago, last year, actually, around this time. It was, it's never too late. No, it's never too early, but it's never too late.
Yeah.
It just has, the deed has to be done.
Yeah.
And it's
Just
never
do it.
easy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've always got ideas, and sometimes, one time somebody was criticizing me and they're like, you always just shoot from the hip. You just think of something, you just do it. And I'm like, I've made
Why
millions
not?
of dollars. I've made millions of dollars just thinking of something and doing it.
Mm-hmm.
You have not. So, it's like, people can criticize me. I don't care. It's like, like with this business, there's some people that are like, oh, you don't have the right software to do that. You don't have this. I started this with an HP Pavilion that was like the best at the time,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
I had some stupid modem connection, and I'm using a landline, and I'm just like, okay, I'm going to start this thing. And some people are like, oh no, you don't have the right CRM software, and you don't have the right this, and you don't have the right that. And it's like, you don't have to. That comes as you
Yeah,
go,
it will come.
right? Like
Get
now,
started.
I've got an amazing tech stack, and that comes in time. You
Mhm.
don't have to wait. If you had to wait for everything to be all perfectly in place, and you have all the systems, you have all this, and you have all that, by the time you're
Never
ready,
get there.
everything's changed. So
Yeah.
just do it. And one thing that somebody gave me a piece of advice that was really valuable is they said every day spend like 15 to 30 minutes doing business development for yourself. So
Yeah.
you don't want to be complacent. You don't want to be to a point where you're like, I'm doing pretty good right now. Oh, my ads are slipping, or I haven't done any SEO on the site, and I haven't done this, and I haven't done that. And then something happens, your customer is getting ready to file for a bankruptcy you don't know about. And then it's like, oh my gosh, we've got to ramp up, And so you want to always do that. It's better just to refer stuff out because you can't take on anything new than to be in a position where you're like freaking out. And
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. So, for the visionaries who are trying to find their purpose or look towards a why, maybe to push their imagination to the same kind of thinking as people like yourself or even as me, in 10 years from now, it's the 11th of April, 8:46. What are you doing at 8:46 UK time, which is maybe 1:46 your time, on the 11th of April in 2034?
I am riding my dressage horse on an estate in the UK.
Wow. Okay. So we're gonna be living next door to each other. All right.
I like it. I love it out there. I've got lots of friends out there, and that's yeah.
Wow. Okay.
So
And where can
that's
people
my
find you?
goal.
If people want to learn more about what you do or maybe inquire about your services, where are the best place to pick up those conversations with you?
Um, I it, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm on X. I'm on. You go to our website, so it's vanellagroup.com. There's a contact us form that'll eventually get to me. Yeah, so I'm pretty accessible, and I'm glad to talk to people that want to learn more.
Well, thank you very, very much for showing up today. Any last words?
No, this was great. I think we covered a bunch of stuff.
We definitely did. We definitely did. So thank
Same
you
as
again.
the last time. Yeah. Well, then we all
Anybody?
find that everything like totally failed to upload.
No, hopefully, I believe they actually put it together this time. So, for anybody that did enjoy this and liked what we're doing, like the episode, share it with people that you think would find this valuable, and subscribe so you can find out more about new episodes that are coming up.
Thanks. Bye.